What's the cringiest thing you've seen at a wedding? I went to a wedding at a Mormon church. It was weird because Mormon churches have basketball courts inside them. The wedding party was using half of the court, but on the other half, a bunch of people who weren't even invited were playing basketball. They wouldn't stop or leave. The basketball hit the food table a couple of times, messing up the wedding food. Story 2. I went to a wedding where the bride really wanted to ride in a horse-drawn carriage to the party after the ceremony. It took forever because the party place was pretty far from the church. Everyone just stood around waiting for the bride and groom to get there. When they finally showed up, the bride said she and her new husband had to go to their hotel room right away to have sex. She really wanted to get pregnant. So we all had to wait around even longer until they came back. The whole thing was super awkward and embarrassing. Story 3. The wedding was in the middle of nowhere. It was at a place called a country club, but it didn't look like they ever had parties there. The town only had one small hotel, and it was full. We planned to drive 3 to 4 hours there, watch the wedding, and leave when people started dancing at the party after. When we got there, hardly anyone was there. We went to the courtyard where the wedding was supposed to happen. The chairs were blowing away in the wind, and workers were trying to catch them. There were hundreds of chairs, but only 20 or 30 people. I kept wondering who was staying in all the hotel rooms. We sat down, feeling shocked but also kind of wanting to laugh. No one else showed up. The wedding time came and went, and it was really uncomfortable. We found out later there wasn't going to be a wedding at all. Someone cheated on their partner the night before, and they had a big fight that morning. I never learned exactly what happened. All we knew was that someone who worked there came out and said, "Sorry," in a really awkward way. They told us to go home because the whole thing was canceled. Story 4. The bride really wanted her cat at the wedding. The groom and his best friend were supposed to bring the cat. They put the cat in their car without a cage. Right before the wedding, they decided to wash their car. They drove through the car wash with the cat inside. This was a very bad idea. The cat got super scared in the car wash. It went crazy and scratched the groom's face really badly. Then the cat peed all over the best man's fancy suit. All this happened just 1 hour before the wedding was supposed to start. It made a big mess and probably ruined their plans for the wedding. Story 5. The groom got into a fight with one of the people serving drinks. One of the guests drank too much, so they had to call for medical help. The police took the groom away in their car, and right behind them was the ambulance. I think it was one of the best weddings I've been to, because I'll never forget it. But the couple who got married, who are still together after about 20 years, might not feel the same way. Story 6. The bride had a really loud breakdown at the church entrance. She was yelling bad words, and everyone inside could hear her. She was super mad because her old grandma didn't follow her color rules. The bride wanted everyone to wear only black and white so her dress would look special. She thought her grandma, who was very small and loved her, messed up everything just because she wore a light blue hat. It was crazy. Story 11. About 15 years ago, I went to a small wedding in Las Vegas. I was there with the bride's best friend. Right after they got married, the new husband and wife started fighting. I don't know why. They both ran away in different directions. My girlfriend went after the bride. Everyone else chased the groom. In less than a minute, I was all alone. My phone didn't work, so I couldn't call anyone. I stayed in the casino by myself for about 2 hours. When everyone came back, they acted like nothing weird happened. That couple broke up after about a year and a half. Story 12. I worked at a wedding as someone who served food. The bride and groom were from different races. Their families didn't like each other. The moms kept trying to outdo each other for the wedding. If one got something, the other had to have it too, or even better. The person planning the wedding told us we had to be very careful. We couldn't serve one set of parents first. We had to serve them at the same time, or they'd get mad. At one point, we had to move the bride's family table a little bit. But we couldn't just do that. We also had to move the groom's family table so they were the same distance from where the bride and groom sat. We had to put the parents in the same spots at their tables. This way, they could see the bride and groom the same, but not look right at each other. I even made sure they got the same amount of food and that no one's plate looked better than anyone else's. It was really tiring to do all this. Story 13. I went to my coworker's wedding at a fancy country club. Both of them were from New York. The bride was a strong woman who didn't take any nonsense. The original priest got sick, so they sent a backup priest. I didn't know that was a thing. This new priest started the wedding and began talking about how, in the Bible, wives should obey their husbands. He said wives should cook, clean, and do what their husbands say. It sounded like something from a long time ago. We all knew the bride well. We watched in surprise as she stayed calm, but we could tell she was very angry inside. After the wedding, she ran off to cry. Then her whole family, including her dad and brothers, surrounded the priest. I really thought they might hurt him because they were so mad. Story 14. My wedding was nice, but it didn't feel like it was really mine. My mom made most of the choices for me. A few months before the wedding, my fiancé said he didn't want to be physical with me anymore. I was really upset from dealing with my mom and begged him to be close to me. He said no, but told me I could be with other people if he didn't find out. He moved to a different room. I told my mom what happened. She said, "It's not a big deal. You don't want sex much anyway." She just wanted me to get married so she could be a grandma. She called me selfish for not wanting to have a baby for her. My mom told the DJ to play my song slower so she could walk to it, even though there was nothing wrong with her legs. When my marriage quickly fell apart, she said, "I should have let you wear a colorful dress," as if that was the problem. I don't talk to my mom anymore. We went to a wedding for a couple we didn't know were super religious. There was no alcohol and no dancing. A string quartet played music during the boring happy hour while people took pictures. But they left when dinner started, and there was no more music after that. A not-so-good magician did a short show when they served cake. There were none of the usual wedding things like throwing the bouquet. They thought those things were bad. There were lots of prayers. The only good part was sitting with the bride's faraway cousins. They spent the whole time telling bad stories about the bride's mom and dad. They talked about the crazy religious stuff the parents did to their kids. The couple wasn't married long before the bride left. The last we heard, she was living with 2 older guys. She was happy to tell people that she was sleeping with both of them. Story 16. I went to a wedding that was really country a few years ago. The groom was 24, and his bride was about 42 with 2 grown-up kids. It was a weird match. They got married in a public park under a little roof. The groom's parents looked unhappy about the wedding. It was super hot, and there wasn't enough food for everyone. They said the party after would be at the Elks Lodge. We thought that might be okay because it had a bar and a big room, but they didn't rent those. They just rented the pool. So there were the usual old drunk people who always go to the Elks Lodge. Then in the pool, there were just 4 people, the bride, groom, and 2 friends. They were all drinking from the same bottle of whiskey. I left right away. They split up 6 months later. Story 17. Last month, I went to the weirdest wedding ever in Los Angeles. It was like watching a train wreck. You want to look away, but you just can't. It all started when the bride forgot to bring the groom's suit. Can you believe it? The poor guy had to borrow the pastor's jacket and tie. He looked so uncomfortable, but that was just the beginning of the mess. When the ceremony started, things got even stranger. The pastor started saying mean stuff about women and people who care about equality. It was super awkward, especially since they were doing some non-Christian stuff in the wedding too. Then came the speeches. Oh boy. The grandmother got up and started talking about aliens from outer space. Like, what? But that wasn't the worst part. She went on and on about how hard it is for men to love women as they get older. It was pretty insulting. Next, the bride's sister stood up and started ranting about how COVID wasn't real. Everyone just sat there, not knowing what to do. To top it all off, I overheard the mother complaining that she couldn't bring her goats to carry the rings. Goats! At a wedding in Los Angeles. I've never seen anything like it. It was like every part of the wedding was trying to be weirder than the last. I felt bad for the bride and groom, but I couldn't help wondering what they were thinking when they planned all this. One thing's for sure, it's a wedding I'll never forget. Story 18. My wife and I didn't really want to go, but we got dragged to her friend's mom's wedding. I think it was the 3rd time the mom was getting married. At first, everything seemed okay. The ceremony went smoothly, and nothing weird happened. But there was this feeling in the air. Everyone was kind of tense and uncomfortable. It felt like people were tiptoeing around something. Then I found out why. The bride's son was there at the wedding, and he had a dark secret. Not long ago, he'd been involved in something really bad. It turns out he and some friends tried to buy drugs, but they never planned to pay for them. Things went wrong, and the groom's nephew ended up dead. The bride's son was arrested for murder, but he made a deal with the court. Instead of going to jail for a long time, he got several years of probation. That means he had to follow strict rules, but he wasn't locked up. So there we were, at this wedding, with the bride's son who was mixed up in the death of the groom's nephew. Talk about awkward. Everyone was trying to act normal, but you could feel the tension. It was the strangest wedding I've ever been to. Not because anything crazy happened, but because of what we all knew. It made me wonder how the bride and groom could go through with it. I guess sometimes people just decide to move forward, no matter how complicated things are. Story 19. I went to this wedding that wasn't exactly the worst, but it sure was funny because of how badly it was planned. My friends, the bride and groom, thought they had everything figured out. They hired a fancy limo to take them and their friends from the church to the party after the wedding. It seemed like a great idea at first. After the wedding, the bride and groom stayed behind with the photographer to take more pictures. Everyone else headed to the party in the limo. So far, so good, right? Well, not quite. At the party, I was standing near the bride's mom when her phone rang. Suddenly, she burst out laughing and started looking for her car keys. I was curious, so I asked her what was going on. She told me, still laughing, 3 of them can't fit in the limo. I have to go pick them up. See, here's the thing. The bride and groom's friends weren't exactly skinny, but nobody thought about that when they hired the limo. So when everyone tried to squeeze in, 3 people were left standing on the sidewalk. I could just imagine them, all dressed up in their fancy clothes, waiting by the road while their friends zoomed off in the limo. And the poor bride's mom had to leave the party to go rescue them. It just goes to show, even when you think you've planned everything perfectly for a wedding, sometimes you forget to consider the simple things, like whether your friends can actually fit in the car you hired. It was my mom's brother's wedding, and it was a mess from start to finish. First, there were the dresses. The bride's mom made them herself, but they looked like a little kid had done it. Still, she charged everyone $300 to $400 for each dress. I was supposed to be a junior bridesmaid, but the bride's mom forgot my dress, so I had to wear regular nice clothes, and she complained about it the whole time. My mom's dress was too small because the bride's mom told her to lose weight before the wedding, but my mom was pregnant, so that wasn't going to happen. The maid of honor's dress was actually a wedding gown. She and the bride's mom insisted on it, even though it wasn't right. They threatened not to pay for the wedding if the bride didn't agree. When the wedding day came, things got even weirder. The groomsmen were all hungover, and some looked high. The maid of honor kept pretending to faint during the ceremony. She'd refuse help, but magically feel better when everyone was looking at her. The worst part came right before the bride and groom said their vows. The bride whispered to the groom that if he ever divorced her, she'd take everything he had. Later, when they had kids, she kept saying she'd take the children away from him if he left. It was like watching a train wreck. Everyone could see how bad it was, but no one could stop it. I felt sorry for my uncle, getting mixed up in all that drama. It definitely wasn't the happy day most people expect a wedding to be. Story 21. The groom's dad was drinking too much. He was saying weird things to young women and tried to fight people who told him to stop. There was also a little 8-year-old boy running around doing a bad Nazi salute and yelling, "Heil Hitler!" My friend, who is black, thought it was funny for some reason. The food at the wedding was bad too. They served spaghetti but ran out before everyone got to eat. Some of us groomsmen didn't even get any food because they served us last. After the wedding, my friend stopped talking to all of us. I think his new wife doesn't like his friends. I haven't talked to him since then. His brother, who's also my good friend, told me he's not happy but doesn't want to get divorced. They just had a baby too. It's really sad because I used to live with my friend for 5 years. He was always the smart one in our group who could see when things weren't right. Now he's stuck in this bad situation and we can't help him. Story 22. It was a morning wedding, so they served breakfast, but it wasn't even good breakfast. It was like the kind you'd get at a cheap hotel, rubbery eggs and cold pancakes. Yuck. Each table only got 1 bottle of bubbly drink for a toast. The morning of the wedding, I got a surprise text message. The bride's cousin, who was supposed to be the DJ, didn't show up. He had drug problems, so I guess it wasn't that surprising. But then the bride asked me to be the DJ for both the ceremony and the party after. I had to learn all the ceremony music just 5 minutes before it started. I used my iPod and a speaker and just did my best. Then for the party, I had to do everything a real DJ would do. I played music when they came in, introduced people for speeches, and started the toasts. It was a lot of work. You'd think they'd be really thankful, right? Nope. Only one person from that whole family said thank you to me. Can you believe it? I'm not married to my ex anymore, and I'm glad I don't have to deal with his rude family. The whole experience showed me how ungrateful they all were. It was supposed to be a happy day, but for me it was just stressful and annoying. At least now I can look back and laugh about how ridiculous it all was. Story 23. The bride just took 2 regular cakes from Walmart and stacked them on top of each other. It didn't look very special. The only good thing about the wedding was the food. That's because I made it, but everything else was just so strange. Story 24. I went to this wedding once that was just so boring. It felt like it went on forever because of all the speeches. Of course, the parents of the bride and groom gave speeches, the maid of honor and best man did too. That's normal. But then, every single person in the wedding party had to give a speech. There were 6 people on each side, so that was a lot of talking. Even some aunts and uncles decided to say something. The good news was that most of these speeches happened after dinner, so at least we weren't sitting there hungry. But here's the bad part. They closed the bar during the speeches. The wine on the tables ran out really fast, and there was no way to get more drinks. Can you believe the dinner and all those speeches took over 3.5 hours? That's longer than most movies. By the time they finally finished and it was time to dance, a lot of people just left. They didn't even stay for the first dance or to see the cake being cut. The second worst part? The bride and groom left right after dinner. We think they were waiting until after the wedding to, But it was weird because there was no real party after dinner. They had hired a DJ, but he didn't get to do much. Everyone just stood around talking for a while and then went home. It was such a letdown. Weddings are supposed to be fun, with dancing and celebrating. But this one felt more like a really long school assembly. I felt bad for the couple, but also for all the guests who sat through all those speeches. Story 25. Picture this. A group of about 12 people, all dressed up in fancy clothes, walking into this regular neighborhood bar. The bartender looked at us, surprised, and asked, "Where's the party?" When we told him we'd just come from a dry wedding, his eyes got wide. He grabbed a big pitcher and said, "Shoot, first round's on me, guys." We were so happy. We ended up staying at that bar for hours, buying 3 more pitchers of drinks. We laughed, told stories, and had the kind of fun we'd been hoping for at the wedding. Looking back, it's funny how things turned out. The wedding might not have been what we expected, but we made our own fun afterward. And that bartender who welcomed us so warmly, he turned a disappointing night into a great memory. Story 26. Let me tell you about my brother's wedding. It was a real mess, all because of the bride. She was what people call a bridezilla, someone who gets way too bossy and mean when planning their wedding. On the wedding day, she yelled at my mom for asking where to put decorations. My mom was just trying to help, but the bride hadn't made a plan, so no one knew what to do. My parents helped pay for the wedding, which was really nice of them, but the bride never even said thank you. Can you believe that? She got mad at one of her bridesmaids for getting a tan before the wedding. She thought the girl was trying to look better than her. My brother wanted me to be in the wedding, but his bride said no. She told him right to his face that I was too pretty and might make her look bad. She only wanted bridesmaids who weren't as pretty as her. How mean is that? During the party after the wedding, she even stole my sister-in-law's jacket. She just took it right off her back because one of her bridesmaids was cold. It was a spring night, so of course it was chilly. That bridesmaid should have brought her own jacket. There were lots of other bad things she did too. It was a nightmare. Well, guess what? About a year later, they got divorced. Turns out, she was just as bossy and mean in their marriage as she was during the wedding. When my family heard about the divorce, we were actually happy. We even had a little party. It sounds bad, but we were just glad my brother was free from such a mean person. Story 27. During the party after the ceremony, my new husband kept ignoring me. I had to practically drag him onto the dance floor, and even then, he only danced with me for one song. I spent a lot of time walking around, trying to find him. When I did find him, he was always talking to other people. He wouldn't even tell me what they were talking about, so I just had to stand there quietly behind him. It felt really lonely, even though it was my wedding day. At the end of the wedding, we had this cute moment where all our guests made a tunnel with their arms for us to walk through. They were cheering for us as we walked to the elevator. It should have been romantic, but then I felt my husband let go of my hand. He had stopped to talk to his friends again. I tried to get his attention by holding his arm and making jokes. When I finally did, he got mad at me. He said I was pulling him away from his friends, but he had been with them all day and night. I just wanted some time with my new husband. I felt so sad and small at that moment. It was the worst I've ever felt about myself. We stayed married for 4 years, but it wasn't a happy marriage. Story 28. I'm a wedding photographer, and I once saw something at a fancy wedding that I'll never forget. This wedding was at a really nice place way out in the countryside. It had a big concrete stairway with water fountains on both sides. The idea was for the bride to walk down these stairs so everyone could see her, like she was coming down from heaven. The wedding started, and all the bridesmaids and groomsmen took their places. Then, the bride appeared at the top of the stairs with her dad. She looked beautiful, but then, something terrible happened. She had only taken a few steps when her shoe twisted. Suddenly, she fell. She tumbled down about 12 feet of hard concrete stairs. When she landed, it was awful. She had knocked out most of her front teeth. There was blood all over her pretty white dress. Everyone was shocked and scared. The problem was, we were in the middle of nowhere. It took 40 whole minutes for an ambulance to get there. The poor bride was in so much pain the whole time. Luckily, she ended up being okay. A few weeks later, I got an email from the couple. They wanted to try the wedding again on a new date. When I went to photograph their second attempt at a wedding, I noticed something right away. There wasn't a single stair in sight. I guess they didn't want to risk anything like that happening again. Story 29. The wedding took place at a beautiful state park known for its deep gorge and big waterfall. It should have been a happy day, but it turned into a terrible tragedy. Someone suggested taking a photo near the gorge. The whole wedding party thought it was a good idea at the time. They went past the safety barriers that were there to protect people. Then something awful happened. The maid of honor fell from the cliff. She didn't survive the fall. It was a very high drop, hundreds of feet down. Story 30. There were about 500 people at the wedding. The bride wanted everything to be perfect. I heard that it cost a whopping $70,000. I was one of the groom's buddies in the wedding party. Before the ceremony, the groom was super nervous. He kept saying, "There are so many people. Everything has to be perfect." He was really stressed out. To help him relax, someone brought out some whiskey. At first, it was just going to be a few sips to calm his nerves. But things got out of hand pretty fast. Before we knew it, he had almost finished the whole bottle. We tried to fix the situation. We gave him water to drink and made him take a shower. Then we helped him get dressed again. It was time for the wedding to start, ready or not. The ceremony began and everything seemed okay at first. The bride started saying her vows, looking all beautiful and happy. But halfway through, disaster struck. The groom suddenly threw up all over the front of her fancy white dress. It was awful to see, but honestly, it was also kind of funny in a weird way. You'd think a start like that would be bad news for their marriage. But guess what? They're still together 8 years later. Story 31. I went to a wedding where the bride and groom bought the wedding package on Groupon, which is fine. Why spend a fortune for one day? But I guess the venue thought they could cut some corners. So they stuck us in a room that smelled so strongly of cat urine some people immediately left. The only drinks were those from a vending machine. It was next to an airport, so every time a plane took off, the ceremony had to be paused because you couldn't hear anything. And the day after the event, every single one of us had food poisoning. I was a bridesmaid for my friend. Flew across the world for over 10 hours to be there. Had to do the setup of the venue, assign people to rooms, put signs on doors, finish the seating chart, transport food, redo her bouquet because she didn't like it, etc. The whole time she's rude and tells everyone within earshot that the bridesmaids aren't helping. Her maid of honor was absolutely bending over backwards trying to keep her happy, and instead of being grateful, she instead told her sister, "I should have asked you to be my maid of honor instead." She was pretty cold to me and kept asking if I'd lost weight. I said yes because I had been ill but didn't think much of it. At the reception, her new husband takes the opportunity to read the speech she clearly wrote for him to say to me, "We are so glad you fit into your dress," in front of over 100 people. I don't speak to her anymore, and neither does her maid of honor or other bridesmaid. Story 32. My nephew is highly allergic to peanuts and was the ring bearer in a wedding when he was very young. The bride and groom made sure that the venue, the caterers, whoever made the cake, all knew that there should be no peanut-containing or contaminated food on the premises for their wedding. No one thought to tell the DJ, though, and the DJ brought peanuts as a snack. He held my nephew's hand, walking him into the reception, and my nephew had a serious reaction. He was okay in the end. Fortunately, the EpiPen did work in his case, but it certainly put a damper on the reception after he had to leave for the hospital. Story 33. I once went to this totally crazy wedding that I'll never forget. It was for a friend of my husband's, someone I didn't know very well. When we got to the church, we saw the groom in the parking lot. He was already really drunk, and he kept drinking more. I thought this was nuts because it was going to be a long Catholic wedding with lots of standing up and kneeling down. I have no idea how he made it through the ceremony, but somehow he did. After the wedding, we all went to the party. The groom just kept on drinking. Meanwhile, his new wife was so upset that she was crying in the bathroom. It was really sad. Then came the first dance. The couple had taken dance lessons for a whole year, but the groom was so drunk he could barely stand up. He just kind of stumbled around the dance floor. But the craziest part was yet to come. There's this tradition where the groom takes off the bride's garter and throws it to the single guys. But instead of doing that, the groom decided to do a strip tease. He took off almost all his clothes right there in front of everyone, including a bunch of older family members. People were shocked. Everyone was talking about how inappropriate it was. The whole wedding was a complete mess. I thought for sure this marriage wouldn't last more than a year or two. But here's the surprise ending. They're still married today, more than 25 years later. Story 34. I was once the maid of honor at a wedding that really opened my eyes about how important honesty is in a relationship. After the ceremony, the bride, groom, best man, and I went into a small room to sign some papers. The person doing the ceremony was there too. The bride excused herself to use the bathroom, and that's when things got weird. As soon as she left, the groom started saying mean things about the bride's cooking. This was really sad because cooking was something the bride loved doing. She was passionate about it. When the bride came back, she heard them talking about cooking family meals together. She didn't know what the groom had really said. She gave him this big, warm smile, thinking he must have been saying nice things about her cooking. The groom looked uncomfortable when she smiled at him. He quickly changed the subject. It was clear he felt awkward because he knew he'd been caught saying unkind things. That moment really stuck with me. I realized the groom wasn't laughing with his new wife, but at her, behind her back. It showed that he wasn't being honest or kind. I wasn't surprised when I heard their marriage only lasted 7 months. Story 35. I once went to a wedding that felt really sad and strange. It wasn't at all what you'd expect from two people who just got married. The wedding started off normal enough. The bride and groom did their first dance together. But after that, things got weird. Instead of spending time together at their own party, the bride and groom went to opposite sides of the room. They each hung out with their own friends and drank a lot. It was like they didn't even want to be near each other on their wedding day. The only other dancing that happened all night was when the bride danced with her high school friends. Then there was the father-daughter dance and the mother-son dance. During the dance with his mom, the groom was crying. It didn't seem like happy tears. The best man's speech was really awkward too. He didn't even mention the bride. He just talked about how he and the groom were such great friends. He said stuff like, "Our friendship is older and stronger than your marriage, and our hunting and fishing trips are the best thing in our lives." It felt like he was trying to keep the groom all to himself. The whole wedding had this sad, desperate feeling. It didn't feel like a happy celebration of love at all. Thank you for listening to these regrettable recaps. Please like and subscribe and comment below and let us know which was your favorite story. We'd also love to hear any stories that you'd be willing to share. We'll see you in the next one.